amazing. If only Dad could have seen this.
I'm going to say something that's going to blow your mind. Colonialism was bad.
No way! No fucking way!
I say that because I want to make sure you and I, dear viewer, are operating on the same general moral framework. And because it's at the thematic core of our main subject. Colonial violence is bad, and so are its extensions, such as plundering some nation's treasures and dressing it up with pretty language to justify it, i.e. calling it archaeology when really you're just stealing, taking shit that doesn't belong to you and calling it science. That is to say, tomb raiding. To be extra clear, I am not here to morally condemn the Tomb Raider video games. Here's another hot take for you. Tomb Raider games are fun. Crazy, right? No one's ever said that before.
No fucking way!
These are games largely concerned with being exciting action-adventure romps in the case of the Survivor games, and challenging platforming action titles in the case of their predecessors. The actual tomb raiding is the set dressing to facilitate the gameplay. The narratives of these games are generally not concerned with interrogating the morality of protagonist Lara Croft's actions, and it's a-okay to just have a turn-off-your-brain globe-trotting adventure if that's what you're in the mood for. I bring all that up because, as it turns out, one specific iteration of the franchise does, in fact, try to interrogate the ethics of tomb raiding. The 2-season animated Netflix series Tomb Raider: The Legend of Lara Croft. Its focus on that idea got me wondering, how does that theme tie into the games it positions itself as a sequel to? And more broadly, how well does it function as a sequel to those games being specifically the Survivor trilogy? These questions have been plaguing my mind ever since I watched this show, so today, we're gonna answer them once and for all. Hang on, is that text blurred? Oh, I'm hiding something from you. Ooh, can't wait to find out what that's about. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of this analysis, let's provide some context. Because I don't expect everyone watching to have an intimate familiarity with the plot of a near-decade-old video game sub-series. Wait a minute, a decade? Oh, God! Because I can't expect everyone to already know all that stuff, what I'm going to do now is first provide some quick overviews of the plots of each game and the 2 seasons of the show. I'll try to keep it breezy, alright? Oh, and one more thing.
One more thing.
Since the show is positioned as a sequel to the Survivor games, this video will focus only on those games and the show to keep the scope of this analysis narrow and focused. It's entirely possible, nay probable, that widening the scope and bringing in other Tomb Raider media would lend further insight into the subjects we're about to cover. I'm happy to acknowledge that as an intentional limitation, and if you think some other piece of Tomb Raider media might alter this analysis, feel free to tell me about it in the comments. Alright, that's my engagement bait for the day. On with the synopses. Tomb Raider 2013, apparently controversial for its brutal cutscene deaths. But don't worry, any death can be made funny if you put the Mario Sunshine music over it. In this game, Lara and her ride-or-die Sam mount an expedition to an island, the lost Japanese kingdom of Yamatai, to investigate legends of the Sun Queen Himiko. Sam is, obviously, the best, and we love her.
The audience demands content, Dr. Whitman.
With them is Lara's mentor, Roth, Big Teddy Bear Jonah, some other people who don't matter, and Whitman, a senior archaeologist and TV personality who is, and this is true, the worst guy on the planet.
May his name be forgotten forever.
They shipwreck on the island and are trapped there because of freak weather. An egomaniac named Matthias runs a trigger-happy cult of angry men who just want to get off the island. Lara calls an item from the 19th century ancient.
Probably dates from the 19th century. Perhaps this was used as an ancient cigarette case.
Girl, I don't think you're very good at your job yet.
Are you sure about that?
Roth tries to mentor Lara into being a stoic badass, then gets killed protecting Lara. Very sad.
What you say? Oh, that you only meant well, 'cause you did.
Whitman betrays the group by working with Matthias and helping them kidnap Sam, and gets immediately karma'd for it.
You're Joe.
What you say?
Matthias needs Sam as a vessel for Himiko, because of course she's controlling the storms around the island, and Lara learns from the lore murals that Himiko pursued immortality by transferring her soul into her handmaidens. Matthias gets the ritual going, and Lara swoops in and steals his gun so she can dual wield after a whole game of bow and arrowing his goons. So finally she is the Tomb Raider, only for the dual wielded guns to be immediately discarded in the next game, so I guess not. Anyway, she princess carries Sam to safety safety and rides into the sunset, determined to seek the mysteries her father was killed for pursuing. Lara's life lesson in this game: the supernatural is real. Time to get obsessed. Rise of the Tomb Raider. Lara's investigating the secret organization that had her dad killed because he got too close to the truth about some ancient immortality secret. The organization is Trinity, and her dad's friend Anna tries to talk her out of it. But she's determined to find the truth behind that ancient mystery to prove her father right. So she tracks their activities to a very cold place with Jonah in tow, trying to keep Lara in check, except oops, they're separated now. Oops, Anna's evil.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
And now Lara's in Trinity jail. She breaks out and helps the leader of the locals escape. Jacob pause for a minute to trip balls about the Baba Yaga. Then, while helping the locals fight off Trinity, Lara learns about legends of an ancient prophet whom Trinity has been pursuing for centuries. He's immortal and possesses something called the Source, which grants immortality, and it's his role and that of his people to protect it. Jonah shows up, and it seems he shed his voice of reason role in the cold and now is just like, damn Lara, you were right. Then he almost gets killed and Jacob revives him because, surprise, he's the prophet. Trinity gets into a big explodey fight with an army of ancient immortal warriors. Anna's dying and wants to use the Source to save herself, and Lara decides to smash it rather than let Trinity have it. Jacob crumbles to dust like he got Thanos snapped, and Lara sets out on another hunt, not for her father's sake, but for her own. Also, Trinity has Anna sniped for shits and grins. Lara's life lesson: learning to let go of your obsessions. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Lara finally comes face to face with the big cheese of Trinity, a guy named I straight up don't remember because every time I mentioned him in my notes, I only wrote Big Cheese, because that's really all he is. She steals an ancient artifact from its home before he can, at least that's her justification. He seems to indicate that he was going to leave it right there, and in so doing triggers a flood, killing countless people. Great job, Lara. Before she can feel any guilt about that, Jonah says, nah fam, then they're off to hunt the next artifact. Lara flashes back to her childhood where Daddy had an overcomplicated puzzle set up in his own house for some reason when he wasn't being an absentee father. Jonah meets his future wife Abby, they scour some ruins and find some dead Trinity at the hands of violent locals. Then some other locals arrest Lara. She quickly endears herself to the locals' queen, Unuratu, who is also leading a rebel faction against a rival leader. Surprise, it's Big Cheese. They're all trying to assemble the same MacGuffins to either control or stave off global disasters. Some very cringe-inducing savage native trope group of people is guarding one such MacGuffin, and they don't like Lara very much. It's Unuratu's destiny to assemble the artifacts and save the world, but oops, she gets killed thanks to Lara, so Lara takes up her mantle. Big Cheese assembles the MacGuffins first and appears to ascend to near godhood.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
The scary people inexplicably like Lara now, so they help fight off Trinity while Lara goes to 1v1 Big Cheese. She then does a self-sacrifice to stop the disasters, but don't worry, she's fine. Happy ending for her back in Croft Manor.
Lovely.
Also, there's another fake-out Jonah death in there somewhere, I think. Lara's life lesson, also learning to let go of your obsessions again, I guess. Legend of Lara Croft, Season 1. Lara's moping around mourning the death of Roth from the first game when Jonah calls up like, hey, maybe check in with your friends sometime? Wanting to divest herself from her dad's legacy, she donates his hordes of stolen treasure to a museum and tries to avoid responsibility at the auction by playing cards with the catering staff. Suddenly, Trevor Belmont shows up and steals one of the things. The first in a series of things, which, when brought together, can cause an apocalypse. So she's got no choice but to chase him down, Jonah in tow. Jonah tries to get her to see the value of teamwork before suffering another fake-out death. Lara confronts her violent nature at the hand of the Red MacGuffin. Then Trevor Belmont reveals he's got Jonah brainwashed and takes the Red MacGuffin. Spend an episode on a quest with estranged childhood friend Camilla to learn the value of seeing things from another's perspective and slowing down and listening to people, not running away from people, and also more about why Trevor Belmont's doing what he's doing. He's a foil to Lara, trying to take down his own big bad evil organization, except he's heedless of the damage he's causing. Get Jonah back after a train fight. Lara gets annoyed at tourist attractions.
I hate theme parks.
And the whole crew works together to beat up Trevor Belmont after he assembles all the things and nearly destroys the world. Lara returns the things to their rightful place so they can't cause any more harm, fights off a T-Rex with her dual-wielded pistols, and then a cliffhanger, oh shit, Sam's in trouble. Life lesson, you don't have to go it alone. Season 2, Lara immediately rescues Sam. They get recruited by an evil billionaire named Mila who wants a specific artifact from Lara's dad's collection, a Yoruba mask which grants powers to their gods, the Orisha. Not realizing that the evil billionaire is in fact evil because she used some pretty words, Lara steals the mask back from the Dickweed Museum curator and hands it over to Mila, who promptly uses it to steal the powers of the Orisha who used to own it and kills a whole bunch of people in the process.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Mila's out to steal all the masks and kill all the Orisha in the process. So to stop her, Lara and Sam team up with the Orisha Eshu, who's traumatized and won't use his powers after failing to prevent his people from being massacred by the British, who are having a grand old time tearing through Africa, being like,
Spot of tea? Give us your country.
They recruit a couple of Orisha to their side, but fail to stop Mila from brutally murdering a couple of others and stealing their powers. Lara and Sam help Eshu rediscover his love and joy and return his mask to him. Then they all face down Mila and her squad in an epic battle, godly powers exploding everywhere. Eshu eventually steals the powers back, melts Mila a la Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they all lived happily ever after. Oh, and Mila's main henchwoman meets up with a new character who's plotting against Lara in a cliffhanger that'll never be resolved. Same life lesson as last season, the end. With all of that context established, we can now start interrogating the questions at the heart of this video. So, when determining how well Netflix's Tomb Raider functions as a sequel to the Survivor trilogy, there's two things we have to focus on. First, because the series is so interested in interrogating the morality of tomb raiding, in reckoning with its colonial/imperialist roots, and figuring out how to right those past wrongs, we must first investigate how the games themselves did or did not deal with those ideas. Second, from a more traditional narrative/character writing perspective, we have to focus on Lara herself, see whether her characterization and personal arc naturally follow from those present in the games. On the first point, how does the Tomb Raider Survivor trilogy engage with the morality of tomb raiding? This is a little tricky because I think you'd be hard-pressed to argue that these games ever intentionally engaged with these ideas, and are indeed self-contradictory regarding them. That is, while you can analyze these games through this lens, you're not going to find a coherent message or stance, which is fine. The games don't need to be about these things in order to be fun, engaging experiences. Nevertheless, it's instructive to understand exactly how these ideas manifest in the games, regardless of the creator's intentions, in order to establish a baseline for how these ideas will be further intentionally explored in the Netflix series. First off, Tomb Raider 2013. Like in the following two games, the ethics of its tomb raiding are dubious, but of the three, this is the closest the games come to getting it right. At least, the least eyebrow-raising. What works here is that the legend Lara is investigating, the ancient ruins she's exploring, isn't, within the context of the narrative, just some random tomb being raided for no other reason than that's what the Tomb Raider does. Lara's not here for personal gain or the thrill of the hunt. Rather, the game goes out of its way to establish a personal connection to all the history on display through the game's primary tertiary character, Sam. In short, Sam is Lara's best friend, and all the legends central to the game's plot about the Sun Queen Himiko and whatnot are all wrapped up in her. Culturally and ethnically, Sam is directly related to that history. It's her history to investigate and uncover, and her right to bring in whoever she darn well pleases to help her. Sam, in other words, gives us the personal connection we need to justify investigating all of this. We're not robbing random ruins, we're investigating history that's personally relevant to a character we ourselves have reason to be invested in. Granted, Tomb Raider 2013 isn't perfect about all of this. Lara will still just straight up steal random artifacts off the floor for no real reason except to have them. Yes, from a gameplay perspective, it's good to learn about the lore, but within the context of the narrative, Lara should just be cataloging her findings, not pocketing them. Still though, for having a personal in into the history via Sam, this first entry is mostly alright. Then we get to the sequel, 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider, and suddenly things aren't so clean. It's a bit of a one step forward, one step back sort of deal. On the one hand, the personal connections to the ancient mysteries being uncovered are tenuous at best. Gone is Sam or anyone like her to fill that function. Ergo Lara, and therefore you, the player, have no real cultural connection with the histories of focus. Instead, Lara inserts herself into this drama Lara only due to recent family drama. Dad was obsessed with this, therefore I am obsessed with this. It's still personal for her, but not in a way that lends her any legitimate authority to be investigating these matters, any more than her enemies after the same thing. The only real difference between them is she's the good guy and they're the bad guys. Sam had every right to investigate the mysteries of the Sun Queen because she's Japanese and the Sun Queen was a figure from Japanese history. So, Japanese woman investigating Japanese history. In Rise, though, we don't have any such connection. Lara's just as much an invader to these parts as Trinity is. She has no cultural connection to the Prophet, she's just following through on her father's obsession. And what right did Dad have to come in and claim these people's history as his own discovery? No more than Lara, no more than Trinity. And Lara's still just stealing shit off the ground. That all being said though, the game did seem to be a little more mindful in its approach to tomb raiding itself. At the end of the optional challenge tombs, Lara never actually takes anything. She just sees what's there and gains a new skill. Assumedly, she's recording her findings in a notebook or something, but not actually taking anything is a step forward. Plus, one of the locals does actually give you a side quest to investigate these tombs. In other words, Lara's investigating these ruins at the request of people who have a right to make such a request for their benefit, not hers. That does lend her investigations some legitimacy. Granted, that NPC being entirely missable does risk making that point moot, but still, better to have that there than not.
Would you share what you've learned with us?
Of course. They belong to your people.
So yes, overall, Lara doing her thing at the request of and for the benefit of the people who have the most rightful claim to the local ruins and their treasures does help to frame her actions as righteous. But it's still all built on the foundation of crazy white lady inserting herself into the affairs of a local people when she really has no business doing so. So, you know, mixed bag. And unfortunately, Shadow of the Tomb Raider from 2018 is more of the same but worse. It's the same shtick, Lara causing problems while chasing her dad's obsession, inserting herself into a local population and earning their trust to lend her investigations into their history some legitimacy, but how much of these problems could have been avoided if she just stayed away? In fact, it kind of gets worse this time around because the narrative leans into some white savior tropes. The queen of the local people in this game, Unuratu, is built up as having some ancient destiny to save her people in a time of great calamity, but in part thanks to Lara, she ends up getting killed, and now it's Lara who has to take her place and fulfill her destiny for her, which is, you know, not great. Look, Unuratu, I know you've been preparing for this role your whole life, but don't you know, I'm the protagonist. I do the important things. You just go die or whatever. I don't need you. What's really funny here is that this is the only game in the series to open with a disclaimer about how this game was built by a multinational, diverse team of people aimed at respecting the cultures and peoples being depicted. But this is honestly the most disrespectful narrative of the whole bunch. Like, how did that happen? So overall, if you're being generous when trying to analyze how the Tomb Raider Survivor trilogy handled the ethics of tomb raiding, you could sum it up as, well, it could be worse. These games occupy a strange middle ground where they both acknowledge the dubious ethics of tomb raiding.
They belong to your people.
And uncritically engage in it. They position Lara as both the enlightened archaeologist and a Tomb Raider. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be fun Tomb Raider games where you get to do what it says on the tin, while also framing Lara as the unambiguous good guy, which she can't be if she's just stealing people's shit. And so we've got a narrative trying to walk a tightrope between saying Tomb Raiding bad and Tomb Raider good, and failing to land on a cohesive stance. To be clear, I'm not assigning malicious intent to anyone involved in the creation of these games. I'm just saying their attempts to balance contradictory ideas ultimately resulted in clumsy, half-baked messaging. But because these games did at least try to acknowledge the dubious ethics of tomb raiding, that does leave the door open for future installments to try to build on that foundation. But before we get to that though, we've got some more groundwork to lay. What about Lara herself? How is she characterized across the Survivor trilogy? Put simply, Lara Croft is not okay. She gets mad and murders en masse just absolute hordes of men, from ancient warriors to modern mercenaries. I'm not even joking, she is scary.
I'm coming for you all!
You're damn right I am. Burn in hell. Don't try me. Fuck you, Rock. I'm coming for you. You are fucking dead.
Oh, okay.
And yes, I have to admit, that classic gaming discourse phrase, you know the one, is quite applicable here, because while gameplay Lara is a mass murder machine, just an absolute Terminator of a woman, shotgun blasting untold hundreds of goons to shreds, cutscene Lara is a much more normal person. Across the games, she's characterized as competent and intelligent, perceptive and pragmatic, and generally kind, motivated by a desire to learn, to help those close to her, and to do what's right. Her pragmatism is especially important to note. So focused is she on her goals that she's generally without humor. She'll smile for excitement or relief, but she's not out here making wisecracks. That's to say, she's quite a serious person. In 2013, she's focused on surviving, on learning about the Sun Queen, and on protecting Sam. Must protect Sam. In Rise and Shadow, her pragmatism gets focused into tunnel vision-like obsession, where she's laser-focused on proving her dad right and stopping Trinity from doing bad shit to the point of jeopardizing her own safety and letting her relationships with the people around her fall by the wayside. Lara becomes an entirely whimsyless character. Nothing gets between her and the goals she sets for herself. Indeed, the only time she ever seems truly relaxed when Sam's not around is at the very end of the last game, when she's finally let go of her obsessions after being so driven by them that she was willing to sacrifice her own life. But even here, it's important to note that she's only letting herself relax after she believes she's accomplished her goals, defeated the baddies, and stopped the bad things.
I'm done searching. I want to be around the living.
And yeah, I guess that's a character arc, going from someone whose obsessions led to her immersing herself in ancient history, only for that history to nearly kill her and everyone. And now she can let go and use her talents to make the present world a better place. Sure. Fine. Straightforward and uncomplicated. Perhaps the games could have done a better job with making Lara reckon with her shortcomings throughout the narrative, build it up more instead of just having her see the light right at the very end, but whatever. Point is, this is all how these games characterize Lara. A competent, serious person who has the potential for kindness, but lets her obsessions blind her until she finally lets go. She's also a murder machine, but honestly, I don't know how to square that with cutscene Lara, so if you'll forgive me, we're just gonna set that bit aside. Aside from that, the pragmatic survivor is the Survivor Trilogy's Lara Croft. And those, overall, are the two factors I want to keep in mind when conducting our analysis of the Netflix show, in determining how it functions as a sequel, whether its focus on righting past archaeological wrongs ties well into the games it follows from, and whether its Lara seems a natural extension of game Lara. Let's focus on the latter first. It's important first to note how the show positions itself as a direct sequel to the Survivor Trilogy. From the very first episode, Lara is suffering from traumatic flashbacks to the events of Tomb Raider 2013, specifically the death of her mentor, Roth. From there, we see how Jonah has continued dating Abby, a character who was only introduced in Shadow, the last game of the trilogy. In fact, he's engaged to her, and they get married at the end of the first season. Early on, we see Lara touring her childhood playground, again only seen in Shadow, and there's other minor references to those games throughout, like at one point, main villain Charles name drops Trinity, the big bad evil organization behind all the bad stuff in the latter two games. So all that paints a clear picture. This show is 100% a direct narrative continuation of the Survivor games. Except it doesn't quite match, and that's mostly up to how Lara is characterized. 3 points to cover here: continuity, grief, and personality. All of which sort of blend together, so bear with me here. First, Shadow ends with Lara seemingly having overcome her demons. She's let go of her obsessions with her father's legacy, and after staying away from it for years, the very last scene of the game shows her comfortable in Croft Manor, smiling as she works at a desk and a butler comes along to offer her tea.
For now, it just feels good to be home.
However, in episode 1 of the show, after the cold open, we get a title card for 3 years later, which would mean that the show takes place soon after the ending of Shadow. And yet, here, we see that Croft Manor is still abandoned, vines creeping up the walls, dusty, cloths draped over everything, cobwebs in the chandelier. In other words, this and that don't match. Add on top of that, the Lara we see in the first episode is drowning in grief over Roth's death, which doesn't cleanly line up with her emotional journey throughout the games, wherein Roth's death is not a driving force for Lara past the first game, nor indeed does she spend much, if any, time grieving him after 2013. On the one hand, Lara keeps very busy in those games, so one could interpret this as, now that she doesn't have a plot to keep her distracted, Lara finally has a chance to slow down and grieve. On the other hand, the near total absence of any such emotion from Lara in those last two games, and indeed them ending with her happy and content after all her adventures are over, renders this sudden shift to drowning in grief jarring. Taken together, the manor being abandoned and Lara grieving Roth, these 2 points don't line up with where we last left Lara, happy at home.
Jonah, I'm fine. I don't need to restart. I just need to keep going.
But you already stopped going. What are you talking about? Granted, all of this could be explained away if you simply imagine that this scene at the manor at the end of Shadow just takes place at some nebulous point in the future after the end of the show. But still, that doesn't change the fact that this is where we left Lara, and the show, in showing us a Lara at a very different point in her emotional journey and doing nothing to clarify how this Lara relates to that Lara, does risk leaving us viewers confused as we try to reconcile how they're supposed to line up. And then there's her personality to consider. Game Lara and show Lara are similar in a lot of ways, namely competency, intelligence, a penchant for obsession, and general badassery. However, there's one key avenue in which show Lara diverges heavily from game Lara, and that is her penchant for jokes and quips.
You just gonna leave me alone in this spooky-ass dark mansion?
It's not spooky, it's Jacobean, except for the ghosts.
Lara in the Survivor games quite categorically did not joke. That's not to say she was soulless. She smiled, could get excited by fascinating new discoveries, but she took everything seriously. Stakes were always high, and she was laser focused on meeting the moment. Now, one of the stated goals of the show was to bridge the gap between the Survivor games and the classic games.
Having played the Survivor series, which were amazing, but also having loved those early games, those are two different Laras that we got. And so I really wanted to know how she became that person. And so this show kind of slots right in that space, building her from that Survivor Lara that we got to know, that really cool origin story, into the woman we fell in love with when we first met her.
And if there's any doubt about that, the first season ends with Lara finally dual-wielding her pistols and doing flips all over the place as she fights a T-Rex, which, to be clear, fucking rules. And that's straight out of Tomb Raider Classic. So maybe, since the Lara of the old games was more playful in her personality, giving Survivor Lara jokes is just the show's way to help further bridge that gap between old Lara and new Lara. To counter that,
no, that's wrong.
May I present the cold open of the first episode, which takes place before the events of Tomb Raider 2013.
Spiked pit. Classic. And I bet. Oh, there it is. Certain death. A nice holiday in Chile, he said. It'll be fun, he said.
Okay, so we've got Lara making quips before the events of the game, then we've got the games where there was nary a single quip. Then we've got the events of the show post-games, where she's back to making quips.
Love your dress. Thank you. It has pockets.
According to this show, Lara's personality ping-ponged between two very different states before, during, and after the Survivor games. The only other thing that would make sense is that this is simply a different Lara, given how vastly different her personality is, but then given how much narrative and emotional weight is given to the events of the first game, we can't pretend that they're different characters. They're the same, and yet not.
Except for the ghosts.
You are fucking dead.
So, what's going on here? A narrative that's dependent on events of the first game for Lara's emotional journey, yet ignores where she ended up at the end of the games. This show would almost make sense if it was just a sequel to Tomb Raider 2013, and yet it brings in a character and references events from the later games, so you can't ignore those either. A Lara who's experienced the same events as game Lara, yet acts like a different person. Between all of that, the narrative of this show and the characterization of Lara is inconsistent with the games at best, which becomes a problem when this show explicitly positions itself as a follow-up to those games. If a story is not consistent with itself, it becomes that much more difficult to stay fully invested in its characters and themes. All of a sudden, I don't feel like I'm watching the same character anymore. I'm watching someone else entirely, a different story entirely, thus hurting the present narrative's credibility when it tries to claim sequel status to those previous entries. If a viewer was already in love with that narrative, then these changes, without further justification, might only serve to alienate them. And to be clear, I'm not saying that any of the creative liberties taken by this show, any of the directions it took Lara, are inherently invalid choices. I'm saying they needed to be better built up in the story. Eliminate the jokes from the cold open, have Lara experience some sort of external trigger to bring on those memories of Roth as a bridge between where we last left her and where we find her now. Otherwise, for all we know, this might as well just be an unrelated show. On the other point, though, that is, unethical archaeology, the show puts this theme front and center. Such a theme was, granted, not at the forefront of the Survivor games. However, as I hope I established, they did lay a foundation for exploring it. They explicitly recognized that out-and-out tomb raiding is generally not great.
They belong to your people.
And made varying attempts at justifying Lara's actions. Sure, the games never delved deep into this theme, but by establishing it, they set a precedent for a future iteration of the franchise to further explore it. And that's exactly what the show set out to do. In fact, the very first thing it does is position itself for a critique of archaeological thievery. The cold open of the first episode sees Lara doing some tomb raiding with Roth when they're accosted by locals. Lara realizes that, wait a minute, we're the baddies stealing these guys' stuff.
Roth, I'm not sure we should be taking this. Roth, I don't think they're marauders. I think they're protectors.
Are we the baddies?
But comes to that realization too late. Roth is insistent that they've got every right to plunder and starts a fight, and to Lara's horror, kills one of them. This positions him as a negative influence in Lara's life, especially when he reassures Lara that they had every right to be there and defend themselves.
Don't let them fool you, girl. They want our treasure.
It's an influence she has to learn to shed over the course of the season, and this particular bit of thievery is just the first domino that sets off the season's wider plot, a mistake Lara spends that whole season fixing. There's also this bit in the third episode where Lara heads to an organization dedicated to restoring artifacts and returning them to their rightful places. Her contact ain't exactly friendly with her, leading to this lovely exchange.
Lady Croft. Ava, I wish I could say it is a pleasure. If you're here to take something, I assure you, our security is much better this time.
I love that exchange because one, it's funny, and two, it's some tight storytelling, implying a storied history with just a cautious tone and the words, "this time." But also, that the show decided to highlight such an organization in the first place, that Lara knew to go there and saw the value in it, shows that the narrative recognizes the harm caused by destructive archaeology and the benefits, even the necessity, of taking a more mindful approach in the field. All of those ideas, though, would be brought to the forefront in Season 2. And by brought to the forefront, I mean stated out loud.
Ethical archaeology. Think of it as the opposite of what your father used to do. Not raiding artifacts, but returning them to where they belong.
And here I was prepared to show how this season's focus on the Orisha and the generational damage inflicted upon largely non-white populations, such as the Yoruba by European colonizers, is carried on in the legacy of unethical archaeology and tomb raiding, which just results in the further plundering of those same populations, now with a supposedly enlightened justification about the pursuit of knowledge that is in reality the same racist sort of dog whistling that colonizers used to justify their violence oh so long ago. But Mila there, the villain of the season, she just went and said it out loud. She just fucking tweeted it. But yeah, anyway, all of that is true, so let's first illustrate how the show does that, then discuss how effective it was in illustrating those ideas and what effect that had on the overall narrative. So this idea is first brought up by the antagonist Mila. Narratively, this serves to, at least temporarily, cast a shadow over the obviously evil aura she exudes from the moment she sets foot on screen. By appearing to embrace an ethical approach to modern archaeology, she gets Lara on her side just long enough to set the plot in motion.
Get a grip, Lara. Not everyone is out to destroy the world.
What this also does is get Lara thinking about the legacy her father left her and how she wants to live with it. Its damages reverberate throughout the season, damages she has to deal with, and in the end, she has to choose to let go in order to set things right.
This feels sad.
I suppose that's how all ends of an era feel, but it's still the right thing to do.
And make no mistake, just because the villain brought up this idea doesn't mean it's a bad one. She was just using it to her own ends, co-opting a good idea to trick people into believing in her and to further her own agenda. The concept of ethical archaeology still has merit, and the rest of the season goes to great pains to illustrate that. Much of the season is concerned with the damages caused by colonialism and the reverberations that last to the modern day. Primarily it does this through Eshu, one of the Orisha and Lara and Sam's tag-along buddy from episode 3 onward. Once a beloved protector, content in his position, when the British come along and decide to do their favorite pastime against his people, crimes against humanity,
give us your country,
the man was left traumatized. He fled from his duty, his family, and his people for centuries, becoming a shell of his former self. Colonial violence stripped this man of all that made him who he was, and it was only in reclaiming his mask, his family, his people, his very culture, that he was able to fully come into his own once more. Apart from Eshu, this theme crops up in other smaller ways throughout the season. There's Zip, who, thanks to being the descendant of slaves who were ripped away from their home, mourns that he never had a chance to learn about his own cultural heritage. And thanks from encouragement from someone connected to that heritage, Eshu, he ends the season determined to right this wrong as he sets out to discover Africa for himself. In episode 2, following a quip from Sam about how slaves are whitewashed by history into being just immigrants,
It says here that during colonial times, 70% of immigrants were West African. Immigrants. Yeah, right.
she and Lara engage in some tomb raiding of a church where Yoruba slaves were forced to convert, and in tearing down that front, they discovered the secret sites where the people maintained their own faith, illustrating how the victims of colonial violence often demonstrated resilience in defiance of their oppressors. So important is this site that when the cops show up, they immediately assume they're tomb raiders there to steal, and not just good Samaritans there to help.
Hands up, tomb raiders!
And I mean, kinda, yeah. At this point in the plot, they don't really have a plan other than make sure the baddies don't get the mask, and how are they gonna do that other than take it themselves? Luckily for them, the local Orisha is still around and able to guard the mask just fine on her own, thank you very much, showing that when violence has been enacted against a people, those people should be in the forefront of the solution. Then, of course, there's the sunken French slave ship in episode 3, which, yes, reinforces that theme of colonial violence equals bad, but also contains one of the greatest moments in Tomb Raider history where Lara Croft straight up sucker punches a great white shark. Then there's Mila's disgustingly brutal murder of a couple other Orisha in the middle episodes, coupled with her proclaiming that she will bring peace to the right people.
I will protect the ones deserving of protection.
She is thus the colonial mindset manifest in a modern person. She believes herself and her own people superior to others no matter the evidence to the contrary, sees what's theirs as hers for the taking, and does not bat an eye at the violence she inflicts in the name of her peace. So yeah, through that and more, the season as a whole is about colonial violence, the havoc it wreaks, and the resilience of its victims in preserving their cultures. And from one point of view, this does make for a compelling narrative. Our heroes continually fail to stop Mila as she gathers more and more power, slaughters more people in an increasingly violent fashion, the situation becoming more and more desperate, the stakes rising higher and higher, until it all climaxes in an epic battle with a mind-bending clash of godly powers. In terms of structuring a season of television, this theme was well utilized in helping to craft a serialized narrative that keeps you coming back for more. There is another perspective to view this all from, though, one that may help to explain why, though these ideas are great on paper, I was left feeling a tad disengaged from the narrative in a way I just wasn't with the prior season. That perspective is how this theme and our protagonist Lara Croft interact, how them together inform the plot, and how it, in turn, informs her growth as a character. In short, very little. There's two big problems here. One is that, in this season, thanks to its focus on the theme of colonial violence and its very correct recognition of the need to center the victims of that violence in the solution to it, Lara Croft ends up feeling like a side character in her own show, a show that has her name in the title. The legend of Lara Croft isn't much of a legend when its subject isn't really doing anything. Eshu attempts to lampshade this toward the end of the last episode with this quip:
I wanted to thank you guys.
You're the one who did it.
True, yes, I did. I mean, you almost died. Useless!
But that falls flat because he's kind of right. He and his fellow Orisha did all the work. Lara and Sam were just his emotional support in the final battle, the pair who helped inspire him to fight again, with and for his people and family. They basically served the same function as Jonah did for Lara in Season 1, which isn't nothing, and even, arguably, the logical role for her to fill, given that if Lara was the one to do all the heavy lifting, this would risk turning into a white savior narrative, and that wouldn't be fun at all. It's entirely possible to write a franchise with a recurring character who serves in a support role for any given entry's main character. But if you do that, you have to give your main character something meaningful to do, either have them develop thanks to their role in the story or give us some new insight into them. Not only does Lara not have a significant role to play this season, but she neither meaningfully interacts with its theme nor develops in any meaningful way. Based on her actions, helping the Orisha and, at the end, making the choice to return her father's stolen artifacts, we get the sense that she recognizes that colonial violence and, by extension, tomb raiding is, ethically speaking, kind of messed up. But we never see her grapple with any of it. She is never forced to directly confront any of the wrongs tied in with her family history, nor do we see her struggle with the choice to do the right thing over honoring her father. Instead, she just observes what happens, passively agrees that bad stuff is bad, and chooses to do the right thing with ease, with no internal conflict whatsoever. It would be one thing if Lara was struggling to hold on to the happy memories of her father and find any educational and historical value in his work while being continually confronted with the violence inherent in his legacy before ultimately being forced to make a choice and erring on the side of good. That would create inner turmoil. Dramatic stakes, but we never get to see that struggle. Instead, she just knows all of that from the start. In other words, she's a static character, just a good guy. The show tries to make up for that by having Sam give a couple speeches about how it's a good thing to rely on other people.
You don't have to hold the whole weight alone, you know?
But that's redundant because that's the exact same lesson Lara learned from Jonah in the previous season. So Lara is left with little to do and no room to grow in her own show, and she needed more than that. And that's the bulk of what I wanted to cover. But before we wrap it up, I have a few other miscellaneous points I want to cover that didn't fit into the main deal. Look, I had to consume a lot of Tomb Raider to make this video, took way too many notes. Just let me get some things off my chest, all right?
You want to tell me what this is about? What's a Huli Jing?
A fox spirit.
Fox spirit?
We've seen stranger things.
That is actually fair.
First, I appreciate how the narrative of the show seemingly recognized Game Lara's potential for extreme hyperviolence.
And how many did you destroy in your process?
The show doesn't do much with that concept past that episode where she has to fight to control her violent side, but still, it's cool that it was addressed at all. Second, I found the lack of an introduction for Zip just a tad jarring. He's a character from the pre-Survivor games who never showed up in those games, and in his first appearance in the show, he and everyone else is acting like he's been here the whole time. Granted, I do like the show don't tell of it all where Zip shows his tech support skills by just doing it instead of having an awkward introduction to the effect of, "Hello, nice to meet you, I'm Zip, I do computers and stuff." But still, a word of acknowledgement regarding how he joined the crew might have helped his sudden introduction feel less jarring. Third, the first season of the show did more to develop Jonah than all three games, which is funny, given that he's the only recurring character in them aside from Lara. I mean, granted, he still serves the same function as in the second and third games, act as the voice of reason, get in danger to raise the stakes, but at least this time, his life lessons seem to stick.
You did it.
We did it.
And his bestie Lara seems to rub off on him in turn.
Go! Finish it!
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Finally, speaking of non-recurring characters, the last point we must confront is the Sam of it all. Sam was, aside from Lara, the most important character from Tomb Raider 2013 because she was the narrative's emotional anchor. We care about what happens to her because of her relationship with Lara, ergo we're motivated to keep playing, making her omission from the next two games one of the most baffling fumbles from AAA video games I think I've ever seen. And side note, but her being omitted from the film adaptation of the 2013 game is also probably one of the reasons why that film flopped so goddamn bad. I assume. I haven't actually watched it since it was new, and I'll be damned if I'm bothered to do that again. Who wants to watch that? Her return in this show thus carried with it a lot of promise, a lot of potential. How will Lara and Sam's relationship develop? How will Sam grow as a character? Will they finally fucking kiss? The sky's the goddamn limit. Unfortunately, like with all of the issues plaguing Lara in Season 2, the show failed to effectively utilize Sam in any meaningful way. Like Lara, she's basically just there. She doesn't contribute much to the plot, she doesn't grow, nor help Lara do so. They share some banter, which is great, but their relationship is otherwise static, and that stings most of all because, look, I'm not crazy. I see the way Sam's looking at Lara here. I know what they were building to, and they had the gall to tease us with the possibility of these two finally hooking up and then failing to deliver before getting canceled. Do you know how many years I've been waiting for this, and they had the chance and just did nothing with it? I am so mad!
History doesn't always tell us the whole truth. People change the past to fit what they want to see. But the real truth is too difficult for most to bear.
So, what did we learn? As a sequel to the Survivor trilogy, Netflix's Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, was partially successful. Its characterization of Lara wasn't totally consistent with the games, and its ideas about confronting the ethics of tomb raiding and its colonial roots, while ambitious, weren't as fleshed out as they could have been to create a compelling story for Lara Croft. But that's not to say the show is without value. In some ways, this show was true to game Lara, getting her to confront her lone wolf attitude and learning to put more faith in her friends, thanks to Jonah and to a lesser extent Sam, was a lesson game Lara absolutely needed to learn, and I'm glad she got to learn it here. Yes, the anti-colonial themes weren't clearly teed up by the games, but they were a bold swing, and I'm glad the show went for it. It was, if nothing else, earnest in exploring them and trying to take Lara Croft to newer, greater heights as an adventurer. So let's go back to the questions at the start of the video. On the first, the games did establish a precedent for that theme, so delving deeper into it was a logical next step for the show to take, even if its handling could have been improved. On the second, I suppose we have to ask another question. What makes a good sequel? If it's just staying true to the literal text of the prior entries, then you could reasonably argue that this show leaves a lot to be desired. But hang on, what's that blurred text there? Let me just rub it a little. Oh yeah, right! This isn't just a sequel, is it? There's also been an entire change in medium, from video games to a serialized television show. And when viewed from that lens, this show starts to make more sense. Different mediums have different strengths, and it's incumbent on any good adaptation to make the necessary changes to take advantage of those strengths in the new medium. That might explain why Lara is immediately like she is. A game can build empathy with the player character through simply having you control them, but you don't get that in a TV show where the audience is a passive observer, so instead you have to give them a clear emotional arc, maybe even jokes, to build that empathy. As a direct sequel to game Lara, show Lara might not line up perfectly, but as an adaptation, she does make sense. And that might explain why, despite all of this show's shortcomings, it may surprise you to know that, plot twist incoming, I kind of love it. The first season more than the second, sure, but as a whole, this was still a wildly entertaining action-adventure romp. Yes, really. Critique I may, but not because I'm mad, rather because I care. It's got lots of fun banter, some genuinely good emotional character work. Yes, show Lara doesn't cleanly map onto game Lara, but I'll tell you what, show Lara was a much more fun, engaging character for the changes made to her, and if it meant making a better story, I don't at all begrudge the show for taking those creative liberties. In fact, I applaud it. That's not to knock game Lara or anything, just, you know.
This is brilliant. But I like this.
And it must be said, the action is exciting, and the animation and general production design are rock solid. While you're listening to my voice right now, you're looking at a bunch of cool shit that I don't need to say anything about other than this is dope, because I mean, just look at this, it rocks! I mean, where else can you say that you've seen Lara Croft jump out of a skyscraper, turn midair, hurl a gas canister, shoot it and make it explode, then ride the explosion to land safely in a helicopter? How can you not love this? So yes, this show is messy, and sure, as a sequel to the Survivor games, it leaves a lot to be desired, and yes, I will never forgive them for dropping the ball with Sam. But still, in spite of its flaws, I genuinely had a great time with this show. If you can look past its shortcomings, it's genuinely a rock-solid adventure show with plenty of humor and action and a smidge of real humanity thrown in for good measure. And it had the potential to get even better, which makes it such a damn shame that it got canceled so early. And now what? We've got that Sophie Turner-led Amazon show? I mean, maybe it'll be good. Sophie Turner's fine, we like her, but look, I'm gonna be real. No Sam, no deal. All right, I've been burned too much. Give me Sam Lara or give me death, please. I beg you. It's been 13 years. Thanks for sitting through my rambling about a short-lived animated sequel to some okay video games. This subject has been a plague on my mind for far too long, and I'm glad to finally expel it in video form. Next time, we'll be back with something more familiar and magical. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.